right, here we go. I'm live on both platforms. Welcome. I see I already have some people joining me on IGTV and on YouTube. So just to recap, since last week's studio stream, I was working on making felt wing ornaments for millinery, and I didn't get to complete one in the stream last week. So I went ahead and completed it off stream and can show you, just to wind up that topic, I can show you what the final one looks like. And I think you can see this pretty good on both platforms. It's 3 layers of, in this case, it's fur felt. That is this is a vintage fur felt that is a modeled sort of look. Some of the fibers are a dark slate blue and some of them are more of a lapis lazuli color. So you get this lovely heathered blue effect to it. And we were talking last stream about how millinery felt can be used to create not just hats themselves, but also different ornaments and trims for them. And I've had several streams in which we've looked at different decorative elements like feathers and leaves, and in this case wings, because as we know, feathers and wings and bird taxidermy and so forth were extremely popular as millinery trims at the end of the 19th century, and in fact their extreme popularity and the effects of that on the bird populations in the world was a driving force behind the establishment of the Audubon Society and conservation movements for wildlife. And so nowadays, here in the 21st century, when we make hats and we want to trim them, there are feathers that can be ethically sourced, and certainly those are beautiful. But I'm always looking for alternative means for evoking those kinds of 19th century effects for a contemporary maker and a contemporary wearer and a contemporary audience, because I'm a theatrical milliner, so we also have to take into account the sensibilities of the people who are viewing the art that we're making and supporting it financially with their ticket buying and their attention. So all that is a long-winded way to say that I'm really excited with this. I guess it's like a mimic of a blue jay or a bluebird wing that I've created with 3 layers of millinery felt. And I've stitched, can you see the stitching there? I've reinforced the visual nature of the feathers with these long tack stitches that attach each of the 3 layers to one another to create an adornment you could put on a hat. I will actually probably make the mate to this, the wing that goes in the opposite direction, before I use it on a hat. But this was an exercise for proof of concept, and I'm pretty pleased with the results. So please feel free to take this idea and reinterpret it however you want to. There was an interesting video that came out this week from a colleague of mine, an Australian milliner. JWH Millinery is the name under which he operates. And actually he and I are co-sponsoring a design challenge for this October, which will be the 35th anniversary of the Phantom of the Opera musical. And our challenge is Phantom 35, hashtag Phantom 35, where you create a hat or a costume item or a full look inspired by either the musical or the original novel or any of the films, just to acknowledge the achievement of that long-running Broadway show, which, by the way, they just started reselling tickets for Broadway and the West End this week. So I think the West End in London is planning on reopening their shows in July, and Broadway is planning on reopening at least some of their shows in September. So that's very exciting. They actually even announced there's going to be a new cast for the West End production of Phantom of the Opera. And I honestly didn't recognize the names. They're like probably famous people in the world of maybe musicals, maybe television. I don't know. But let's move on to what I had actually scheduled for this week's stream as the thing that I was going to be working on. You can see this really well, those of you who are on YouTube, and I'll sort of try to get it all into the screen for my friends on IGTV. This is the skeleton. This is the base structure of what, I'll put it on so you can see. This is the support structure for a rabbit mask, and it's going to be a pink sort of Easter bunny festive fun, or at least that was my thought. His eyes have ended up kind of creepy and maybe not quite so adorable, but I can fudge those after I get a little bit further on the construction of it. This rabbit head is actually, I won't say it's the first large full head character mask that I made in my career, but it's definitely the first one that I made using this concept of carving a matrix for the mask. And when I say matrix, that is sort of a positive sculpture on which you form something like thermoplastic or paper mache, or in this case, this is a medical casting material, you know, if you break your leg. This is a material called Veriform, and you use it for a cast if you break your leg as the structural support. It's activated by heat and becomes malleable, and then it becomes rigid again when it cools down. And for this one, we used, so I mentioned the matrix sculpture on which you form your mask shape. That matrix, this was the first time I created that matrix using subtractive sculpting techniques, which is where you start like with marble sculptors do this. People who, like Michelangelo did this with David, where you start with a block and you take away materials until you get down to where you have the form of the thing that you want. If I had looked it up before I started this stream, Michelangelo actually, I think it was him, had a really good quote about finding the form of the sculpture in the block of the marble, that it's in there, he just had to find it. And that was something that I thought about frequently as I was making the sculpture, reverse carving, or subtractive carving the matrix for this rabbit head mask. This all came about, I guess it might have been as long ago as 2008, 2009, 2010. It's been quite a while. And it was, so I belong to USITT, which is the United States Institute of Technical Theater Artisans. And they host a costume symposium every summer, and it's a different topic each time. Like there's been bespoke tailoring and surface design and dyeing. And for this one, it was character costumes. And we made a head like this for, in this case, a sweet bunny, an Easter bunny. But we also made half-scale forms of pod bodies, which is like if you go to, for example, Disney World, and somebody in a full-size, human-sized Mickey Mouse costume comes up to you. They're not shaped like a human anymore. They have a lot of padding and the structure of that costume that makes them look like the character instead of a person is the body part is called a pod. And so they talked about at this symposium making these kinds of character heads, but also talked about making pod bodies for the character costume bodies. You might also, you might actually even be more familiar with the concept of these heads and these pod costumes. Like certainly you're familiar with them from theme parks where you have licensed characters like I think at Carowinds here in North Carolina, their characters are like the Peanuts, Snoopy and Charlie Brown and those characters. Disneyland is of course, Mickey Mouse, Minnie Mouse, Donald Duck, Goofy, etc. Sesame Street Live is a touring show that has these types of costumes. Also a lot of the ice shows. So you've probably seen that before. And sports mascots, that's another area in which you probably have seen a human in a costume that is not remotely shaped like a human body. And with sports mascots, they're also not really shaped like the body of the animal because they're like this weird hybrid between a cheerleader and the mascot. So like I teach at UNC-Chapel Hill, go Tar Heels, and our mascot is Ramses the ram, and our Ramses character costume for the mascot cheerleader has a big head like this, big ram horns and such. But he also has a pretty athletic body to him so that the cheerleader who is portraying the mascot can do backflips and all kinds of cool things. These are areas in which you can specialize as a costumer. And I think that was what the focus of this symposium was, where we created these things. But you may also have seen these types of costumes and heard of this through the furry subculture. People who like to dress up in these character costumes and adopt these personas, where they embody some character, whether it's a magical squirrel or a lynx or a kitty. They make the most ornate character costumes that are then their costume, and they go out and portray that character in public places. And they, because it's I don't even want to say it's a hobby necessarily, but it's like a fandom, I guess, almost. It's sort of related in that, there's a lot of very personal interest in the creation of that costume, the same way that cosplayers get really excited about screen accuracy and replicating their Harley Quinn costume so it looks just like Harley Quinn in this specific issue of this specific comic or this specific film. And there's so much documentation because the import of the execution of the costumes for cosplayers and for furries is it's significant that I, as a theatrical costumer, am so grateful for that documentation. And it actually is what inspired me in the first place back when I really began writing my blog that has now become my YouTube channel and so forth. I was really inspired by how those communities, cosplay and furries, took the lead on documenting their processes and making it freely available for anybody to read or to avail themselves of the information. And now that we have 3D printing technology, furries have saved my life on making character costumes and other types of not cartoonish costumes, but more realistic costumes, because you can download and print the matrix basically, or even the foundation like this rabbit head that I have here. You can download those on the site I use most is thingiverse.com, which is a freeware, shareware marketplace. I don't want to say marketplace because you don't pay for it, but it's a database, I suppose, that I'll go to Thingiverse and I'll type in something like bear head mask, and there'll be 2 or 3 different iterations that I could grab the file and 3D print it and see if I like the topography of the skull or the shape that you would then put fur over. It's really super helpful. So big props to cosplayers and furries from this theatrical costumer. So grateful. I'm digressing from the rabbit head though. I got this rabbit head from work. We have been, he has sat in my dye room for literally a decade, waiting for me to have the free time to finish him up, because, you know, at the symposium where I carved the matrix sculpture for this rabbit head, and then formed this base structure for the rabbit head, they gave us the information for how to finish it up, but time-wise, there just wasn't the time to finish it. So I brought him home, and I did get him finished. I got his eyes created, and I had big dreams that he would be finished in time to just become part of our costume collection, and someone might use the rabbit in some student production, I don't know, high school drama. No, did not happen. He has sat there being a little distant inspiration to my mask students, but not getting finished because the free time has never presented itself, and now that free time exists. And I kind of forgot he existed, but we're doing a lot of, they are doing a lot of renovations on the facilities at UNC-Chapel Hill's Department of Dramatic Art in the costume areas. And they're doing a lot of work now in the dye room, which is where he's been kept. So that's a big circuitous tale to get to the point where my manager handed him off to me along with his ears. Because I did even get his ears made. I just didn't get them attached to his cranium. And I have a small scrap of the remaining pink fur that once his ears are on, this pink fur will probably cover the area where the ears come out of this Veriform head structure. And it kind of depends on how much of it I have. Like, this is all that there is, so I can't fully skin this face, which I would not want to do anyway, because one of the structural characteristics of Veriform that is so positive is the visibility that comes from the mesh structure. If you watch The Masked Singer, we have watched that here at my house every season. It's entertaining, but primarily because I love watching the costumes and trying to, you know, deconstruct how they're made and stuff. And I'm often struck by wanting to know where the visual, where the wearer can see out of the head. And that is, especially for stage, one of the really important features of Veriform is, if you look inside of this guy, the interior side is painted black, which makes it completely disappear under stage lights. And then the outside is painted, in this case, like a pink candy cane, or like candy, cotton candy rabbit, not fur, but face. So that when your person who's wearing it is wearing it, and I think you can tell pretty good on the camera here that if you look super close, you can maybe see my facial features inside of here, but really you're distracted by this rabbit head situation that's happening on the mask, and not seeing through to what's inside this gridwork structure. Meanwhile, I can see you, or I can see my camera and the film of this, the stream, perfectly. So, you know, the original concept for these rabbits that was shown in the workshop. Oh, I see. Welcome. I see someone has just joined me on IGTV as well. the original concept for these rabbits at the symposium where I learned to make one was a dance piece, and it was a children's ballet, and the concept of the costume designs was really driven by the art of Beatrix Potter. If you're familiar with her, she draws a lot of these endearing little animals wearing clothing and sort of anthropomorphized into humanesque characters, but they're, ducks and badgers and rabbits. And so the original costume design for the rabbits that it's supposed to be inspired by was these pretty naturalistic looking, not very cartoonish rabbit heads, where they were doing a kick line. I mean, these were probably 6 ballet dancers dressed in Beatrix Potter costumes, so like human clothes, but then rabbit heads and fuzzy mitts for their paws. So that was, I believe, the inspiration for the choice of this Veriform mesh for our base structure of the rabbit heads, because they didn't skin these in any way other than applying the ears to the crown of the head. And in that way, the ballet dancers had no obstruction to their full range of peripheral vision, which was fantastic for those ballet dancers. Now, I'm speaking of a performance that happened 10 years ago. I see someone has commented, I loved Beatrix Potter as a child. Jemima Puddle Duck was my favorite. She was my favorite too. She was really an appealing character. That's someone commenting in the chat on IGTV. For those of you on YouTube who can't read that chat, I have to switch between the two chats and translate for one another. But it's, it is the price of streaming on 2 platforms, various camera angles and 2 chats happening at the same time. So, I also want to mention that this week I've been doing this for a while, cutting my stream off at 3:45 because I wind up with prior commitments that show up on my calendar at 4 p.m. and just streaming right until 4, which was customarily my practice and how I envisioned the stream in the first place, is turning out to not be really feasible with the way that work is evolving as the pandemic is evolving and what my responsibilities are. So I want to keep the stream on Thursdays if I can, and so just modifying it slightly into a 45-minute stream is my first shot at that. If we have to, in the future, I wouldn't be opposed to moving it to a different date or a different time entirely, but I have a certain amount of following folks who show up here at 3, and as a fan of other people's regular weekly or monthly streams, once you establish a traditional time, it's good to stick with that because people have it in their mind and they have it in their calendar. Anyway, I'm going to end the stream at 3:45 today. Welcomes. Brazilian Baroness has joined over on IGTV. Good to see you. More friends popping into the stream. I'll end at 3:45. I've set my alarm. It's a thing that we'll do. But my real plan for what I wanted to do today was explain and then begin applying these ears to this rabbit head. I have no timeline on this. There's no actual production that needs this rabbit to exist. But I'm setting a goal for myself that I want it to be something that when we return to the theater and to the academic institution in the fall, that I'll be able to take the rabbit head back, and instead of putting the parts of him on a shelf in my diary room to be a teaching example mid-construction for my students, I want him to be complete such that he can go into our costume stock in the off chance that anybody needs a rabbit head in the future, I mean, I can't think of a show that has rabbits in it. If you can, please drop it into the chat. I'm sure there must be one. Oh, I know. Harvey, isn't it? I think it's called Harvey, where the guy has an imaginary huge rabbit friend. Anyway, I just want this guy to be done and to be a resource for the people who avail themselves of our costume stock for their own theatrical costuming needs. So let me walk you through where he's at structurally before I cut into him. So I mentioned that I carved a matrix sculpture, which looked just like this. Like if you take a look at this rabbit head, I'll put it on real quick. It looked just like this. Topographically, you know, there were roundy cheeks and a little chin and brow ridges here that we then formed the Veriform over. Now that's a thermoplastic, which I mentioned that it originated in the medical supply industry as a casting thermoplastic to stabilize a broken leg and stuff. But you can buy it from a vendor for costuming purposes. The vendor is named Sturgis. Oh God! Now that I've said it out loud, Sturgis and Gill, I believe. There's only one vendor, and they're in California. This is not cheap. The sheets that it comes in are, I want to say, like 36 by 45. They're big enough that you could get 2 rabbit heads out of one sheet. And at the time that I participated in this workshop, they were $52 a sheet. I'm sure they are more. Douglas and Sturgis, that is the name. And I'm actually going to, I can't chat without signing in. No, I'm not going to do that. I will put it, I'm sorry. I have just completely messed up my stream. Okay. I'm back on YouTube. Sorry about that. I will put it into the description of the video on YouTube once this stream is over. Douglas and Sturgis. I think their URL is much easier to remember. It's artstuff, spelled ARTSTUF, 1F.com, artstuff.com. And so far as I know, that's the only distributor right now. Unless, and I will admit, I have not been very vigilant about keeping up with Veriform, because the theater that I work for, we don't have a lot of call to use this type of material for these sorts of costumes. That's not to say that we couldn't change our focus to do a lot of children's theater and strange animals, but right now I haven't had to buy any of this for any of the costumes I make for my theater. Mostly we buy this for supplies for the mask class that I teach. That said, I know I've just sat here and told you that artstuff.com is the only vendor, but there have been so many great cosplay supply companies that have popped up in the last 10 years, repackaging and vending materials, excuse me, repackaging and distributing materials sold wholesale in other industries that can be repurposed for cosplay use. So it's possible that some cosplay supplier has decided to start distributing Veriform as well as artstuff.com. And if not, and you happen to be a cosplay supplier, look into it, because I bet that, I have mixed feelings about the fact that Douglas and Sturgis has a monopoly on Veriform right now. There's only one place to buy it from. unless you have an account with a prosthetics or a medical supply company, which I do not. But it could be lucrative, is all I'm saying. If you look at the rabbit and you notice that in the topography of the face, like let's look at this cheek right here, and there's the bulge of the cheek coming out, and then there's the valleys around the cheek that are sort of the creases of the face. There's one around this jowl here as well. And those are the areas where if you look really close, you can see that, you know, I need to stop saying we as if there were more people than me. At the theater, there often are more people than me, but in the case of this rabbit, it was only me. Cut a piece this size and a piece this size, and then when I applied them to the matrix, there's an overlap down in those valleys, which is partly because that's sort of a shadow of the shape, and I knew I would be emphasizing the shadows and the highlights with paint, which you can, I think, see pretty well. You can see it better on YouTube, I think, where there's a dark pink down in these crevices and a lighter pink, the ball of the cheeks here. But there's also a solidity in there where the two mesh edges overlap each other. And that is a property of Veriform that it's worth noting, is just something that you have to work with. The thermoplastic that impregnates the open weave canvas sticks to itself in the same way that if you've worked with Wonderflex, Wonderflex Pro, Terraflex, Warbla, all of those, once you activate it, they sort of act as their own glue. When you stick two pieces of Warbla together and you smash that seam down, and you can really get it to stick to itself and get the plastic layers to kind of integrate into one another. This is a little bit different with Veriform because the thermoplastic is a coating on a mesh canvas. This is kind of like the mesh canvas is like if you've ever latch hooked a rug or any of that sort of tufted base structure. That's what the canvas part of this is, and then the coating is the thermoplastic that attaches to itself. So I didn't use any reinforcement of adhesive when I put these pieces together, but I did. If you imagine you can't see this at all on IGTV. I apologize. You can see it great on YouTube because of the landscape view. If you imagine this head as a sculpture, you know, there's a pretty large opening here. It's big enough for me to be able to put my head inside of it, but it is not a big enough opening to pull the sculpture matrix out of the Veriform once it exists. So I think you can see back here on the back top, the rear of this cranium curve, you can see the stitches that I had to slit it up to a certain point to get the sculpture out of it. And the nature of Veriform is such that, you know, I don't have extra layers. You know, I don't have seam allowance here because this wasn't intended to be a seam. So I had to stitch it back together with, that's tie wire. And now that I'm talking about this and I'm thinking about it, that's sort of a flaw on behalf of the organizers of the symposium that taught us about this, because I think I would just engineer my pattern so that I have an overlap there, leave it open until you take it out of the mold, and then seal it back up together. Like, and then you don't have this problem. Well, you don't have this creepy stitching up the back of the cranium, which admittedly it's only creepy to me because I'm the artisan that's making this thing. And in the long run, this would be covered with pink fur and you won't even see that weird head scar that's happening inside of there. But that principle of being able to cut it open and then stitch it back together, whether it's with tie wire or with heavy thread like high mark or nylon for running through a walking foot machine or whatever, is how I'm going to attach these ears. Because down here at the bottom of the ear, you can see it better on this other ear because I've already started manipulating it. At the bottom of the ear, we have a slit. Ooh, I need to cut it all the way through. Hang on, let me do that. At the bottom of the ear, we have a slit in the structure so that we can make it kind of like two legs doing the splits forward and backward. And so my thought for getting this ear to go down in the rabbit cranium and stand up is that it'll stay flat, it'll slip into the slit that I'll cut, and then I'll make it do the splits in there and be able to stitch through and through my Veriform, grabbing these millinery wire legs and this is, I think, 1/8 of an inch craft foam, and the fur itself to really stabilize it so that as I put this on the table here and stabilize it, that ear stands up really nicely. And it also has some good movement. Like if you imagine this rabbit head being worn by somebody doing whatever their performance action is, like you want some play in the movement of that ear, but you don't necessarily want it to just flop all over the place, and you don't want it to lay down. Well, I don't want it to lay down flat down the back. That's a very different rabbit than the character of the rabbit that I'm envisioning this to be. The orientation of the ears really does reveal a lot of character in these things. And if I want it to have a little bit of curvature to it, you know, I've wired the edge of this. There's millinery wire that goes up inside this fur edge or this fur backing of the ear. And so now I've got some curve in my rabbit ear, and that when that moves, that's fun. That's really sweet. I expect, it's already 3:38. I may not even get one ear into this rabbit today, but I've made a lot of progress in explaining to you what it is. I see that I have Trisha has arrived over on IGTV, Creative Costume Academy. She is a colleague and she took some classes at the university where I teach, and now she teaches pattern drafting online, the Creative Costume Academy. So if you want to know anything about, if you want to improve your pattern drafting skills and especially fitting garments that you make at home, she's your woman. She can help you out. And she says, it's always good to think of how you could make it better. Yes, it very much is. And genius to have the legs go either way to stabilize. Yeah, because if I just had them go one way, then maybe I can show you that a little bit on this ear where they're not bent. If I have them both bend to the front, then the wire, it would be easy for it to get bent back and stay bent back because there's nothing sort of pressing forward from behind. Whereas if you make them do the splits, then you have pressure from the wire coming on the front and pressure from the wire coming on the back, so that the shape structure wants to stay more upright into the configuration that you create. And that's actually a millinery concept that I teach when I teach hat making. to my students, which I am normally talking about millinery in this stream. So if there are any of you who are hat makers who have been hanging in for the long run on this, hoping I might drop some pearl of wisdom about millinery when it comes to rabbit heads, that's the pearl of wisdom, is that if you need to wire a decorative element to stand up on a hat, if you can, instead of just having one strip of wire that comes up, if you can give it a little foot in 2 or more directions, that will make it want to stay rigid in the upright configuration that you want it to. I often tell my students to, instead of, if you have the millinery wire come down and then it has a little leg that sticks out that you're going to secure to the hat, if you can make that into a triangle, like a little duck foot, instead of a single line stick figure foot, then the duck foot is the most stable way to support that upright trim element. Trisha says, I love and miss costumes, but I suspect that you might be about to jump back in because production is resuming. I just saw that Cirque du Soleil is planning on reopening at least 2 of their shows in Vegas within the next couple months, and with the rest of them slated coming thereafter. And it seems like our industry is about to return. So Trisha, maybe more costumes are in the pipeline for you, and I actually bet that you have some secrets to tell me about that. I have a series that I'm launching on YouTube. The first video comes out this month called Costume Professionals Making a Living Making Costumes, where I interview people like myself where your job is to make costumes. That's what you do. People pay you for it. And my first interview subject is Denise Chuchina, who has a business called Skeleton Key Cosplay, making custom cosplays for clients all over North America. And I'm going to be talking to Trisha as hopefully my second interview about not only her pattern making online pattern drafting school, but also her other business, Pattern Seamstress, where she makes costumes for primarily casino shows and touring shows and Vegas spectaculars. But she's done all kinds of really cool stuff. And I have this theory that when we speak on Monday to do our video for the raw footage that I'll then edit, and then this will come out like a month from now or whatever, I hope that what she's going to tell me is that this summer is the last installment of Pattern Making 101 for 2021, because hopefully she's heard back from people in Vegas and Blue Man Group and Cirque du Soleil and stuff, and maybe she just has enough contracts that she has to put the teaching school on hiatus until 2022. But I'm really just guessing there. I'm just spitballing, and I know none of that as true. But I will say I am very excited to know that Broadway production is happening, because I do have one of our graduate students who's going to New York City for the summer, and we're trying to get her in at a costume shop there called John Christensen, who is one of the costume shops in the Costume Industry Coalition that's been involved in a lot of sort of advocacy and lobbying for the arts industry in this pandemic pause, as all of us just lost our livelihoods and we have such highly specialized skill sets and focuses for our businesses that you can't necessarily pivot from making, one-of-a-kind acrobatic rabbit costumes into like sewing sweatsuits and PPE and, the jobs that exist. Some people have been able to do that, and that's great, but the further up the ladder as you get as a pattern drafter and as a team leader, the harder it is to pivot, because your knowledge is much more specialized, and fashion industry and mass production has really switched to be computer-centric. Computerized drafting for units for orders of 10,000 is different from pattern drafting by hand, where you make 10 of a costume and then you don't make it again, or you make it again next year if the show goes into a long run or something. Anyway, I've managed to just run out the clock on my, yep, there's my alarm. So yes, it is 3:45 and I need to stop my stream here today, and moving forward this will be my stream from 3 to 3:45 so that I can make my 4 o'clock appointments. But I'm loving that the rabbit is part of my stream now, and I'm hoping to next week's stream, my goal is to have one ear installed, but I'll wait to put the other one on until the stream so you can see how I do it. That's my goal. We'll see if it happens. I also want to mention that I have a video coming out on Monday on my YouTube channel that I'm super excited about, because it is a 1940s hat reproduction tutorial for how to make a hat from a wool hat body, a capeline, a cartwheel hat body with no waist. And the original inspiration piece was reclaimed, reworked fedora that was made into a woman's hat style in the 40s during austerity measures. And I just love those kinds of upcycling practices that were happening in the 40s. And I love sort of archaeologically figuring out what they did and then replicating them now in the 21st century, where we care about upcycling for a different reason. We're not at war with the whole entire world, but we care about trying to save the planet and trying to minimize waste. So that's coming out Monday at 4 p.m. It'll upload to my channel. Thank you so much for visiting me in my open studio stream. I'll be doing this every Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time until there's a time change, and then it'll be Eastern Standard Time.